You're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Brian Hunter, author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. Black Friday is coming up. And this is Come Follow Me. This is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and it's bring your own refreshments. Except today, we're celebrating Fast Sunday. Actually, I'm filming this on November 2nd, so I do this a couple of weeks in advance, and it'll be interesting. By the time you see this, the election in the United States will be over. There are certain critical issues. We're at kind of dangerous times, and it's interesting studying the Book of Mormon during an election cycle. In the United States, we do it every 2 years. So I hope you're paying attention to stuff, learning the lessons that the Book of Mormon has to teach us. And on that happy note, we're going to be talking about today's theme, Smolder, the sad tale of destruction. So, it starts out with Mormon chapter 7. Oh, forgot this. Here's my tie. I'm going tieless, so it's a nice Hawaiian tie. Having some fun. So, Mormon chapter 7. Now, here's some personal background with this. Now I'm going to tell you a story, and let me preface this. This is my perspective on it. This is my point of view, so I'm not saying this is everyone's point of view, but this is what happened. We had our MTC teacher, and he wanted to read to us from the Book of Mormon in Mormon chapter 7. And so I asked a question before we began, like, well, isn't this written to the Lamanites and not to missionaries? And again, this is my point of view. He froze up, and we dropped the matter. I've thought about that off and on over the decades. He was an MTC teacher, so he should have been a great missionary and learning how to think on your feet and deal with objections. But yeah, he just kind of froze up, and then we've done that. And I remember this happening another time in my mission where I asked a question and it threw people off. Now we all understand that questions are allowed, but are we training leaders on how to deal with questions that they may not be prepared to answer? Are they able to defer something, saying, okay, well, this is how I would have responded. I would have said, yes, that is the interpretation, but there's also the application. Are we likening these scriptures to ourselves? And with that likening to ourselves, does that feel like a good approach for what we're studying today? Sounds fair. We're able to cover both bases. Another way to say is, that's a good question. I'm not prepared to answer that question, and let me get back to you on that. Would it feel okay if we just were to move ahead with things? Yeah, there's different ways to do that, and getting that into our consciousness, etc. That may be a helpful thing. So, this chapter is about Know Ye. It's interesting because in the last general conference of this year, 2024, Henry B. Eyring talked about the simple truths of the gospel. Quentin L. Cook talked about scriptures. David B. Haight. A couple of decades earlier, Elder David B. Haight of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles gave a talk called The Gospel Basics Haven't Changed. And earlier, Elder L. Tom Perry, also of the 12, gave a talk called Back to Basics. And that's helpful. We also have this tendency to start hanging out on the branches of the gospel rather than the trees, or sometimes doing some things that just are of no worth. President Benson gave a talk called The Power of the Word, where he talked about it's these activities and programs and budgets don't save. It's the gospel. And we get so busy focusing on these activities and programs that we ignore the gospel. Where getting the Eagle Award has the same value as getting a mission call, or more important than being endowed or getting a missionary called. And that's the wrong direction. I'm glad we're facing the right direction. He ties us to our identities. Know ye. You know who you are, what your identity is. Once again, as I was saying, there's universal doctrine and personal application. Interesting, the parts about being bloodthirsty. Does that apply to you? What type of thoughts do you think about people who you really hate, who tick you off? Lastly, the key thing to remember is the mission of Christ's redemption. Now, that is the last of Mormon's writing, and we get the handoff to Moroni. And he's talking to believers, and the key word is covenant. And he's giving a series of bullet points, so it's a little bit hard to sum up. bullet points make it really easy to read. Just you're not getting bogged down in phraseology and nuance. It's like, okay, let's just get to the point, which is why I have this podcast set. I want to get to the point. The handoff, here's some summaries where he talks about the destruction. The hand of the Lord has done it. This is not called passive occurrence, but an active act. Mormon 4 verses 5 says, "But behold, the judgments of God will overtake the wicked. It is by the wicked that the wicked are punished. For it is the wicked that stir up the hearts of children of men into bloodshed." That's interesting. Some people say, well, God just lets it happen as a course of natural law. It's like, no, that's not what you're reading here. What you're reading is that the Lord of the hand, God's active in this. God actively withholds blessings in order to protect people. We'll talk a little about that later. The scene is one continuous round of bloodshed. I think what happens is that how quickly that collapse happened. That you start out as a kid, everyone's getting along. 50 years later, you're killing each other. You're seeing that go on right now, a little bit slow motion, but as Elder Bednar talked about, in the space of not many years. He gives some words to Joseph Smith, and he also talks about the imperfections of the record. Joseph Smith said, Joseph Smith Manual, chapter 45 said, "I never told you I was perfect." Article of Faith 8 has an expression as far as they're translated correctly. We as Latter-day Saints don't believe in the all-sufficient, infallible, plenary verbal inspiration of the Scriptures. We realize that errors creep in, transcription errors, human limitations of language. Now, it's interesting to think about that when Joseph Smith got revelations, you have the written description, but you also have there's a visual component that it's not written down. First of all, think about the vision of Moroni, where Moroni was describing where the plates were. Then Joseph Smith had this vision in his mind, the hill Cumorah, so he knew what Moroni was talking about. He had recognized the hill, knew where to go. Same thing when you read section 107, you'll see this expression, according to the vision. When Joseph Smith got this vision about church leadership, or a series of visions that were put together in one revelation, there's a visual component, so he saw what was going on, not just reading the words. We don't have that visual component. Back then there wasn't a way to record that, and there's no way to record a visual impression to someone's mind, even today, Neuralink notwithstanding. So it's sort of interesting to keep in mind is that you need this separate revelation in addition to the words given. So, yeah, it's not all sufficient in the Bible, and that's one of the glorious things of the restoration. The eternal principles will roll on. We have to deal with the mortal muddle. There's the Temple of Persis, give us temporary setbacks, such as 116 pages in the unbuilt temples. Moroni talks about the importance of studying Isaiah. And, do this, get a copy of the Community of Christ Bible with the Joseph Smith translations in it, and just cycle through Isaiah as many times as you can in 1 year. It talks about the prayers of the saints for the record, making sure that this would come in the future. And he also talks about signs of the last day, blood, vapors of smoke. Saints chapter 1 talks about the Sumbawa volcano. When I was a kid, Mount St. Helens in 1980, 1988, the Yellowstone fires, 1945, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 1986, the vapors of smoke over Chernobyl, 2011, Fukushima, some natural, some unnatural, pollution. He also talks about the churches that are prideful, clothing, enabling sinners, indulgences, and indulging in sin. That clothing's a real thing. Just look at some of the historical issues. On my mission in Portugal, there's a city called Beja. They had a museum there, and they had the clerical vestments with the gold threads intertwined with it, so I have no problem believing that. Saw with my own eyeballs. And then he says, right as if we're president, as if you were president, is what Moroni writes. He had this vision, he saw our day, so he knows what's going on. He writes as if we were present, as if we're having a eye-to-eye and a heart-to-heart conversation with him as you read the Book of Mormon. President Benson said, if they saw our day and chose those things which would be of greatest worth to us, is not that how we should study the Book of Mormon? We should constantly ask ourselves, why did the Lord inspire Mormon, Moroni, or Alma to include this in their records? What lessons can I learn from that to help me live in this day and age? A little, not just passive reading and then slam the book shut and go to bed. hug your kids, kiss your wife, go to bed. No, it's be more aggressive. You're talking about things, expounding. People as pollutions. False churches as pollutions. Are we talking about that? Alma the Younger, when he went to the Zoramites, he was sickened when he saw the false worship. You can love people, but are you having that same reaction? Or are we embracing it? Are you showing up to church meetings and people telling you to embrace apostate traditions? This is Messages to Believer, General Christendom, and not to members, though there is some application to it. It's hard to figure out exactly the audience because he's talking about members, but he's talking about these churches where they offer indulgences. So it's kind of a fuzzy thing. So my sense is that this is just Christianity in general Christendom. Mormon chapter 9, because as it says in Mormon chapter 9, he's writing to all else, the non-believers. And he asks, what's it going to take to get you to believe? And he talks about what we'd call irresistible grace. I say unto you that you would be more miserable to dwell with the holy and just God under the consciousness of your filthiness before him than you would to dwell with the damned souls in hell. Unrighteous dominion. Some versions of grace are actually just forms of unrighteous dominion. Dragging people to hell, drag your kids to church. At some point, with friends who leave the church, you have to sit there and say, okay, I respect you, I love you, I disagree with you, but I'm not going to coerce you. Dragging someone to heaven is more painful, and it'll be a worse punishment than sending them to hell or the lower kingdoms. Now, you don't drag someone kicking and screaming into heaven, as sad as you feel, and it's something you need to repent of. Denying the revelations and gift of miracles. God does not change. Moroni talks about an imaginary God. This is the God of personal credulity. People say, I can't possibly believe God would do something like that, or I don't believe God would do something like that. That's a nice opinion, but how does reality function? Can you separate your opinions from reality? And are your opinions separated from reality? That's sort of, pay attention to people as whether they believe something just from personal credulity, or can they cite an authority for that, cite the scriptures for it. It's like, I believe, okay, that's a nice belief, but is it true? And can you probably, it gets a little bit confusing when someone says, wait a minute, your beliefs aren't true. I believe, therefore it is. Talks about miracles. Christ's life is full of miracles. The creation, the atonement, his resurrection. Bruce R. McConkie, in A New Witness for the Articles of Faith, said, in the ultimate sense, all that God does is a miracle. In the ultimate sense, all that God does is a miracle. Why do people hate him? That just may be a dividing line. You have scientism in David Hume. The idea is that miracles are against the laws of nature. And you respond, well, since we don't know what all the laws of nature are, what does it exactly mean? Science is an inductive process. Miracles in Christ's atonement. It talks about the three pillars of eternity. God the Father, Adam, the creation, Adam, Christ, judgment, creation and atonement. The reason why you don't believe in miracles is because you have no faith. Then Moroni talks about the nature of the record, about why they wrote in Egyptian rather than Hebrew. Joseph Smith Manual, Chapter 4. 13 minutes, and that's today's lesson. I got to the point. Yeah. Make sure you're reading the Book of Mormon and not repeating things I say. Sometimes we show up to these classes and you ask, okay, what do you think? And people just repeat, well, this is what I heard on a podcast. You're not studying, you're repeating. It's like talking to a chat bot. So the Christ quotient. Let me begin with the atonement quotient, as President Nelson encouraged us to do. What's the atonement perspective on what happened to the Nephites? What do atoned people kill each other? Is the problem with the Nephites, why did they collapse? Is because they weren't embracing Christ's atonement? Or were they embracing the natural man? That's your choice. Christ and the atonement, or a natural man and the Nephite collapse. This book's the echo collapse. Back in the 50s and 60s, there were discussions about nuclear war and people coming out of bomb shelters, what the world would be like. A couple of episodes of The Twilight Zone about that. This is our thing. Yeah, that's a real thing. It may not be nuclear. It may be something else. The echo of the collapse. Our day net. This is sort of a filter, a net that we cast out. As you read the Book of Mormon, you're casting out a net. Says, how does this relate to our days? What are you catching in that net? Hopefully nothing fishy, but what patterns, trends, and themes are you finding in the Book of Mormon that you're noticing right now? Like I said, I'm filming this on November 2nd. By the time you see this, the election will probably be over. You'll know who's president. You know which direction the country's taking for the next 4 years. Violence, which I don't know as I'm filming this, but we certainly know the pattern from the Book of Mormon, the way things are going. The pride cycle, secret combinations, assassinations, and disrupted elections. Three disputed elections, and the nonstop assassinations from the Gadiantans. Pollutions. Another thing is the identity. Do you know who you are? Do you know who Christ is? Another thing, what are you doing with your faith? Are you believing in imaginary gods? The gods of the pundits and social media prophets? The soothsayers of TikTok? Are you believing the Book of Mormon? Remember, the Book of Mormon, we're still under condemnation for neglect of the Book of Mormon. That's something to think about this. All these years, we're still not using the Book of Mormon correctly. When you give a talk, are you teaching from the Book of Mormon? Or are you teaching from your social media feed? What are you doing with your faith? So this is not the Disney happy ending we all like. It's not the one we want, but we're being told what we need to know. And the ultimate thing to know is Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, that's the point.